Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about the notion of the symbolic finger. So what is the symbolic finger? And why do I call it the symbolic finger? So this concept of the concept of the symbolic finger that I've been exploring has to do with my work on the phenomenology of dating. However, I believe this concept can can start to become more generally applied uh, rather than the context of dating. But the inspiration of the concept kind of came from the whole Adam and Eve mythology, um, mainly because there seems to be this presentation of um, the snake kind of presents the object to Eve, and then Eve apparently presents the fruit to Adam. What's interesting about the mythology of Adam and Eve is that because Eve sort of presents the fruit to Adam, um, I really enjoyed this kind of depiction because it shows immediately how it was the hand that framed the desire. Um, and this was like the temptation, so to speak. This was the temptation. And since there's been a lot of work on the epistemology of the eye, which is um, which is basically what I would refer to as like Freud and Lacan, especially Lacan. Um, I would say that Lacan, just from kind of being introduced by him through the seminar of anxiety that I'm still reading, um, and then like some little brief introductions that I've had from my spontaneous like interactions with like Zizek and everything else. Um, you start to see that really Lacan kind of brings up a very robust system of the dominant sense, which is the eye. Um, so I believe we're definitely in the epistemology of the eye still. However, I don't. How can I say this? Um, I think it's obvious that we're in the epistemology of the eye. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like, because you get this a lot of like paranoia about, oh, people can see what I'm doing, and the cameras go on and flicker on, and they can spy on me and everything else, and everything seems to be kind of like a phobia of the ocular. um, but it seems like to me we're not really paying attention to the symbolic finger, and this is where I'm going to talk about this a little bit more and show how the symbolic finger sort of runs its course without us really realizing it. And so one of the best examples, and so just to kind of give you a brief introduction, so why do I call it the symbolic finger rather than like the hand? Um, I actually have like a very interesting like reason for this, even though like I have a hard time not calling it hand. Um, but the reason why I call it the symbolic finger is because when you are sort of grabbing things with your own hands, um, they have this really weird phenomenological experience where they converge and it feels like one thing, you know. And what's also interesting is that with your own fingers, you have to like actively move them to get the sense of like I have fingers. Whereas when you're like grabbing things and pulling things, the concept of fingers don't really become manifest in your experience. Um, it's not until maybe like you bash your pinky or or a finger on something that it becomes apparent like it's this finger that hurts. Um, so yeah, so basically what I'm saying is I call it finger because really they have this tendency of convergence where it's like the fingers almost go absent. It almost becomes basically one finger. Um, and also, there is this interesting dialectic between the hand, what we call the hand, because it's funny, phenomenologically speaking, the hand, we would call it like this entire thing, right? The finger and the palm. However, what gives you the concept of hand is when the hands are able, is when the fingers are able to meet with the palm in some type of fashion, that you get the concept of hand. Um, so it's this convergence with the fingers and the palm that give you the concept of hand. The concept of hand actually is not, is ironically not a given, believe it or not. I would argue it's not a given, so to speak. It's only with the fingers and the meeting of the palm that you get the concept of hand. And that, yeah, but this is the interesting things for me because it's like the fingers and the palm have to make contact in some fashion, for you to have the phenomenological experience of grabbing something, of hand, of anything, really. But because now that we have that concept, the concept of hand, um, it makes it easier for us to already just kind of go with, you know, the notion of like hand as a given, essentially. But yeah, actually, the fingers kind of function as a kind of like weird present absence kind of thing. Like they have this tendency to kind of just, they have such lightweight um, constitution, has such a lightweight constitution that most of the time, like if you were to kind of, if you, I don't know if you, I mean, I think most people have felt this, right? If you stick your hand out the car window and just have the wind kind of blow through, you get a sense of the palm resisting the wind, but when the wind goes through your fingers, it's almost like as if um, it's almost as if there's nothing there, um, because you're feeling it not only on the fingers, but you're feeling it on here on the inside. So you get this impression of the inside, that gives the phenomenological experience as if the fingers are not there. Um, but really, it's the palm that gives you the impression that obviously you are an object in the way of the wind. But the finger is definitely um, so lightweight. And I do find it interesting that some people have to like, for example, like they want to tell like the direction. They have to like lick their finger to have the direction. Like they have to have some added presence, some added sensitivity to the finger to um, get a sense of where the wind is going. If not, the finger cannot tell by itself, right? So I find that very fascinating. But anyways, the main point. So that's my explanation about why I call it the symbolic finger and not the hand. Um, and the other thing is, when it comes to the eye and the hand, or when it comes to the eye and the symbolic finger, we can understand it in this fashion, that the eye, because of psychoanalysis, I think psychoanalysis has done a wonderful job in showing that the I is always narcissistically self interested, right? And this is where it becomes interesting when it comes to the hand or the symbolic finger. The symbolic finger frames desire, it frames the desire, the object of desire for the I. And this is why I really enjoy the myth of the mythology of Adam and Eve, because this is the most blatant kind of temptation, but then also shows how the hand had its role in sort of framing desire. Um, and I think it's even more interesting that the hand is always the thing that kind of goes absent. It's like almost the first thing that goes absent in the presence of an object of desire. Um, some of my most favorite obscene examples are like, like a woman, uh, a woman like, juggling her breasts, or like a man sending a dick pic, right? It's the hand that frames desire. So it's very fascinating that that's our phenomenological experience of the hand and its relation to desire. Because the eye, even though the eye can find what it desires, it cannot um, frame it, which is very interesting. The eye itself cannot frame it, cannot necessarily, in a way, capture it to make it have a relation with it. But the hand is what allows the eye to have a relation to the object of desire, because it frames it for it. It frames it, right? And I'm also thinking in conjunction with Lacan's mirror stage, when he talks about, there's not only just the mirror, there's also the frame. Um, and so, and through the anxiety seminar, he does talk about how, like, anxiety is the frame, that which is sort of outside the point of space within the mirror. But um, if we drop mirror metaphors, the hand is sort of what frames desire. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And just to kind of go into more contemporary fashion, this concept of digital media, right? This is fascinating to me. The concept of the fact that it's called digital media, right? What are your fingers called, right? Like, in a more fancy term, they're called digits. Um, so I don't think it's any coincidence that it's called digital media, because the hand is exactly like what I've been saying. The hand frames desire. And if we want to go back to the sort of rising of technology and social media, one of the biggest things was like MySpace, but I think the most manifest part of this was when Facebook came out. Facebook came out with the concept of poking, right? Like, you could poke someone, And to me, that's a very finger kind of action, like this concept of poking. Um, and even the concept of liking somebody's post, it's funny because Facebook actually hasn't changed it. Liking somebody's post, which was probably which was the original um, manifestation before the heart kind of came into depiction, or the heart became manifest, is the like icon is a finger thumbs up, right? And it's funny that this thumb up action is what frames desire for the digital post, right? People enjoy the content. And so it it already shows why this post is enjoyed, why this post is sort of wanted, because you can see how the hand symbolically frames the desire. Um, so that's one example. Facebook, the poking, the idea of liking something, and the sort of icon, the famous icon of the thumbs up. There is another um, concept, right? When Tinder came out, it was this concept of swiping. Again, swiping is a very hand based action. So the swiping, swipe left, swipe right, again, hand based motion. So again, if you tap lot, if you swipe left or you swipe right, this sort of frames desire. Do you want this person? Do you not want this person? Do you find them attractive? Do you not find them attractive? Again, the hand is once again framing desire. Uh, Another example, when we go to like Instagram and maybe like TikTok, um, just the idea or the concept of scrolling, which was typically done, the concept of scrolling was typically done with a mouse, but now scrolling in the more mobile digital sense, the one that scrolls is the finger, you know, or you could say the thumb, but again, finger. So it's the symbolic finger is really throughout a lot of digital media, right? And this is why, again, I like it's interesting that it's called digital media, because fingers, fancy name, digits, um, the concept of Facebook coming up with the notion of the thumbs up like button. Again, this icon is what frames desire for the post. Um, Instagram with its notion of all you have to do is tap to like a post. Again, a very hand based action, this notion of tapping. Remember, going back to poking, um, and Tinder with its notion of swiping and not swiping. This is again how the symbolic finger sort of frames desire. And we don't understand how the symbolic finger sort of runs through its course, because, again, when you are interacting with the object of desire, and we can think of digital media in the intimate sense, like your phone as the sort of medium for this, is that because the eye is so narcissistically self-interested, you don't even, half the time, I would say, you don't even really notice the hand that is in front of you going like this, right? Like, you're just, because the eye is so narcissistically self-interested, it's just like in this perpetual loop of enjoyment, essentially, with itself. um, and the hand is just constantly framing it for you, right? It's just frame, 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 frame by frame by frame by frame by frame by frame. Now, I had previously, I think, asserted on the net that the eye intimately knows time, but the hand and the voice, which maybe I'll have time to go into that, but definitely not in this video. Um, the hand and the voice is intimately knows space. Um, it is interesting when it comes to like the phenomena of, and I haven't been able to necessarily argue why the eye is something that intimately knows time. I can definitely argue why the hand and the voice intimately know space. I give a famous example of, how do you know if something is shallow or not, or hollow? You can't really know visually speaking, but when you start tapping it, and when you start, tapping it with that, you can kind of hear its hollowness. And so it's definitely an interaction of like the voice, like what I would call like the echo, and the intimate relation with the hand and the object, and that gives you the sort of impression and understanding that, oh, this wall is hollow. um, and so that's why I kind of argue that the hand and the voice sort of intimately know space. Now, I haven't really argued exactly why the eye would intimately know time. One of the biggest problems with that whole claim is because currently we are still stuck in the paradigm where the eye is the master of space. The eye is the dominant sense for the epistemology of space, which is extremely problematic. And not only is it the dominant eye for space, it's also the um, dominant sense for our identity and orientation. And so you can see here when you start thinking about the Lacanian mirror stage, that space and identity, when space becomes identity when the eye is the dominant sense. Now, what would it mean? This is interesting. This is an interesting question. What would it mean for us to kind of do that the other way around? That instead of the eye being the dominant sense for identity, what would it mean for the hand? The hand being the dominant one um, for our identity, which is kind of funny because the hand, you know, it it would intimately know the body, so to speak, um, and the same thing with the voice, but yeah, I don't know. I have to go more into that, but anyways, I think one argument that I was thinking about just now for the eye being intimate with time, to me, it might make sense of why the eye is intimate with time, mainly because of its. I think we can use its flaw as the course of argument for the reason why it is intimate with time. Um, and the reason why I say this is the fact of its narcissistic self interest, right? The narcissistic self interest is something of a kind of self relational negativity, right? However, when we put this in the context of time, it's almost similar to dividing pi. Like it's almost like trying to find the n number for pi, the mathematical pi. It just sort of just keeps going, right? And so, because we initially say that the I is narcissistically self interest, my argument for the reason why I possibly is intimate with time is because it's similar to the way when you try to find the last number for pi, it just sort of keeps going. It just keeps going, right? And that narcissistic self interest, it just keeps going. And this is why the concept of YouTube reels, of um, TikTok videos, and how they just keep transitioning to like another, is that the I, because it intimately knows time, it basically eradicates for you the concept of chronos, like um, the and of course what I mean by time, I would say it's not I would say the I, when I say the I intimately knows time, it's not time in the sense of the chronological time, like, oh yeah, past, present, future. No, I'm talking about like time, almost like a kind of like infinity, eternity kind of concept. Um, and because it intimately knows time like that, you tend to actually go through, because of the I's narcissistic self interest, you go through this like self forgetting, and in this self forgetting, you're sort of like actually in this sort of, you could say, like infinite moment. And then finally, when you drop the when the I drops the narcissistic self interest, you are thrusted back into chronos, into sequential time, and then you go, oh my god, look how much time that I've lost. I've spent like how many other hours. But realizing that you spent like 5 hours or whatever is a sort of like post hoc realization of like, you know um, of you being so uh, the I being so narcissistically self-interested. um, so it does seem to kind of pull you in that direction, especially with like the phenomena of like TikTok reels and YouTube reels. Like, again, because of the narcissistic self-interest, I think that's exactly why I would argue the concept of time in that fashion. And I know that seems very bizarre and counterintuitive, but I guess I'm willing to stick my neck out there on that one a little bit. Don't know how far, to what extent, but we'll see. Um, but yeah, hopefully this video kind of gives a better depiction on this. I'm still working through the phenomenology of dating. I haven't been able to briefly do one, but I think I did like a total of like 4 lectures. But um, overall, I think they're going to be a very promising series, mainly because um, I don't really know. I don't really know where I'm going with this one too much. I'm kind of just taking what I perceive as the phenomenological experience of the subject and kind of like what social and contemporary culture understands. And then I'm kind of just kind of exploring and digging deeper into um, what that looks like. And of course, people like Lacan and Badu and Zizek, they're very helpful in sort of navigating some of those areas. But then also at the same time, like, I think when it comes to the phenomenology of dating, like there is something a little bit different. Um, there is something that's unexplored there. Um, yeah, there's something that's unexplored there. Um, and I don't really know exactly what it is, but I think my main argument for the phenomenology of dating, which is counterintuitive, perhaps to a lot of people, at least probably to a lot of laymen, would be that actually finding love, so to speak, like people typically think, oh yeah, I'm dating to find love. Um, no, Like to me that's not the ground. That is not the ground of dating at all. The ground of dating is, ironically, just to date. But I break this down in the concept of to date, date as like the idea of a fruit, the actual fruit date, the fruit date, um, is to be presented with a kind of temptation. And of course, I am not, when I say temptation, I am not confining this in a theological space of like, oh, that's sin and so on. Of course, there's arguments. I mean, there's parts of that that's sort of, I guess you could say, imminent in that. But this is not this is not a theological exploration. But I use theological sort of tools to get there. But I like the concept of temptation. So, but I'm also kind of stripping it of its theological notions. Um, but yes, I call the ground of dating the ground of temptation, and I used Adam and Eve mythology to show why that's true. Now, the reason why I push back on the idea that, oh, dating is not the ground of dating is not to find love, the reason why I don't call it that ground is because I am it's because the person that is wanting to date has no concept of what love is, has no concept. They have an idea, but they really have no concept, right? And this is where I'm like most Lacanian in the sense that, when Lacan says, oh, love is something that you can't give, and the person also doesn't want it, right? But to me, like, this is the temptation, right? Is that we think that love is something that the other can give, and that we we do want it, like we want it, right? But how does that correspond with Lacan's statement about love is something that you can't give, and it's something that the other person doesn't want, right? um, it's because love, the concept of the love that Lacan is actually talking about, is something that cannot be offered, right? And what the person thinks with love is actually a kind of fantasy. And that's something that can be offered. And that's something they do want. But the love that Lacan is talking about, like we can say real love, to play even in the Lacanian fashion, real, the notion of real love, is something that cannot be offered. So it is, in that sense, true what Lacan is saying, that love is something that you cannot give, and then also it is something that's they don't want. And so if we want to understand the conjunction, is that Lacan is talking about real love, and what the other person actually wants and wants to be offered is some type of fantasy. But they think that's love, so it becomes love as fantasy rather than real love. So if you wanted to understand how those two kind of relate to each other, and how really they're not so different, in the sense that I guess, well, they're different, but you can understand how they relate to each other. Um, so it doesn't seem so bizarre and so opposite. But yeah, because if you think about it, Lacan is sort of saying it in a negative fashion, like actually your concept of love is actually a fantasy, and that's what can be offered, and that's what you would want. But real love is something that can't be given, and something that cannot be wanted, right? Because love is not a kind of love is not something that one can offer, right? And if you think about it, how is it that two people can fall in love when the first thing they're doing is looking for love, right? Like, if you just really think about this, I remember I did this video like a long time ago when I first started my my videos on dating is, how can you say that, you know, you found love when the person you met didn't have it before, and you didn't have it either? So you both met not having love, and then suddenly there's love, right? And this is what like Lacan is almost saying here. Is like, yes, lack is what kind of creates the manifestation of love, but neither of us can give it. Because if you could, if you could, then there would be no illusions about how this love came about. Now, what's funny about that, phenomenologically speaking, is that people always say, "Oh, we were talking, and and this person did this action, and I fell in love, and like blah blah blah." Everyone has a story of something of that nature. Um, but anyways, I think I've digressed a bit on this topic. But yeah, hopefully the symbolic finger kind of makes sense now. If you take anything away, it's really just the idea that it frames desire for the subject. And yeah, all right. All right, guys, take care.